Thanks everyone for coming. So I run this centre at Demos. Well, I don't really run it, but I'm one of the founders of it. I don't really do that much work there anymore, which uses machine learning in social science research. And I founded it with one of my colleagues who's right here in the front, Jeremy, who understands all the technology far better than I do, from the University of Sussex Informatics Department. And the idea was that we would try to bridge our disciplines somehow. I'm social science and he is informatics, and we thought we can try to create a sort of social media science where we can use some machine learning techniques in the study of social problems. And we've been doing that for several years, but Jeremy said to me earlier, this is quite a technical crowd. And if you start trying to talk about machine learning, they're going to crucify you. So I'm not really going to talk about the technicalities of any of this because you would crucify me. But I'm going to talk about the political and social consequences of what I think is happening with artificial intelligence at the moment and where it might go. And I'll probably speak for only about 20 minutes or so and then open it up. And you guys are all sort of familiar with the basics of economics, and the economics ultimatum game. So I thought I'd bring a couple of books here. And anyone who wants to at the end can buy one for the best offer. And if no one offers anything, I'll give it away for free. So you can work out what incentive you have as sort of semi-economic individuals about how you should play that game. Now, I think all of us have seen in the last probably 2 years, maybe only even 18 months, what I think has been a remarkable backlash against big technology. I wasn't really anticipating it very much, and in some ways I'm part of the problem because I did this series on Silicon Valley, which was rather critical of a lot of the practices of the companies based there. But it's part of a quite palpable change in public and political opinion about the role of particularly big technology firms. And there are several reasons for that. One of them, of course, is the size of these companies, particularly Facebook. We call them, it's GAFA, Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple. The big four, the size of them, the amount of money that they've made inevitably draws a certain sort of suspicion from people, and particularly from politicians. But I think there's something bigger going on than that. Part of it is a disappointment. Some of you might remember in the 1990s the amazing promises of what technology was going to do to our politics, and how when we were all connected and when we had more information and more data, and I remember people saying this, our politics would become nicer, it would become kinder, it would be wiser, and when we were fully informed and connected to other people, we would be able to dispel misunderstanding. Nicholas Negroponte even said that we would see the end of nationalism because it would no longer be necessary when we were all... He said that in 1997. I mean, it sounds absolutely ludicrous now. And so some of what's happened, I think, has been a disappointment about the promises of building this wonderful new world. But there's something else going on even beyond that, too. And I think one of it is completely unpredictable. But in another way, if you think about it, very, very obvious, which is that, have you noticed in the last year or so how many negative stories in the newspapers there has been about big technology firms? It's absolutely incredible. Whether it's YouTube being, home to extremist videos where advertising is being sold, or Facebook's role in something or other, or Amazon's tax affairs, or whatever it is, Apple not giving over encryption keys to the FBI, just a series of stories. And part of that has been driven by a complete transformation in advertising revenue. So newspapers are now extraordinarily frustrated that Google and Facebook account for over 85% of all new online advertising revenue, and feel like as a result they are not picking up the web traffic revenue that they expected. And they're really angry about this because it is undermining their business model. And there is no doubt that that has been partly the reason for a slew of stories that have been very negative about technology firms, and that has started to shift public opinion. And I don't think people were really predicting that that would happen. And alongside that, of course, bigger concerns about what's happening to our data, who has it, who's using it, and the kind of natural fears that people have when they're dealing sometimes with technology that they cannot quite understand. And finally, I think, politicians getting very, very frustrated that they can't easily raise taxes, so they're getting very angry about that. They're looking for people to blame, and what I sort of sometimes call the algorithm fallacy. A belief amongst many politicians that there is no problem that cannot be resolved with a clever algorithm. And partly that is because politicians, like the rest of us, are amazed and dazzled by how brilliant Amazon's recommendation engine seems to be in terms of telling you what new books you should read. And without fully understanding quite the complexity of the technology, they therefore think, well, if you can throw up for me the next book I should read, or you're able to track my purchasing history so beautifully well that you can tell me what else I should buy, why is it that you're not able to remove extremist or terrorist content from the internet? You have these brilliant technologists. As I think David Cameron said, you need to put your best people on this in terms of removing this type of material. And so all of these things together, I think, have combined to create quite a dangerous moment in technology circles, which is that public opinion is shifting, I think, quite dramatically against technology companies, and politicians, feeling emboldened by that, are also looking to regulate them far more. And you can see that in a series of different places. Uber's or TfL's decision about Uber here in London, the European Commission's decision about fining Google for antitrust, the FBI's investigation into the role of advertising in the American election, and so on and so on. So you are seeing a combination here of public opinion and political action that is turning the tide against big tech. Now, a lot of this stuff has not much to do with machine learning necessarily, but increasingly I think people are putting those things together, because after all, a lot of the big tech firms are using this technology and talk about it all the time. And I think, as I see it, we're on the verge of seeing something rather similar, a pretty big backlash against machine learning and artificial intelligence for some of the same reasons that I've outlined before. And you don't operate in a bubble. The operating environment that you have is obviously determined partly by public hopes and expectations and confidence and trust, and also the regulatory or legal framework in which you do your work. And I think there is a real danger that it's going to get a lot harder to do this stuff, and all the wonderful things that can come with that are going to get harder to achieve. Now, in this television series that I did on the secrets of Silicon Valley, a lot of it, or the first episode anyway, was about jobs. And I have never known a subject, and I've worked in politics for over a decade now at this think tank Demos, I've never known a subject to leap so quickly into the public imagination as artificial intelligence and jobs. It's been absolutely incredible. Now, I'm sure many of you who understand it are thinking, God, people don't get it, they're irrational, they're emotional, they don't really understand the technology. And that is true, but that is also people, because that's how people respond to things. And I want to just say a little thing about how I think that things might unfold. Now, everywhere I went in Silicon Valley, people said to me the same thing when I talked about the prospects that, is machine learning and artificial intelligence going to lead to a robots jobs apocalypse? And there's all these studies saying 50% of jobs are going to go by 2030, or 70% of jobs are going to go by 2070, or whatever. And the answer in Silicon Valley from the tech people I spoke to was always the same. Oh, well, we had a tech revolution. We had an industrial revolution before. We already did that. We did an industrial revolution. And people, the Luddites, they were worried about their jobs, but we created more jobs. And those jobs were better jobs. And so that's what will happen again now. And I just think to myself, that is an absolutely ridiculous answer. I mean, has anyone studied the Industrial Revolution in detail and sort of recalls what actually happened during the Industrial Revolution? I mean, yes, we created new jobs. Yes, some of those jobs ended up being better, but not before life expectancy went through the floor. Millions of people were displaced. We had children working down mines and in factories for piecemeal wages. Communities were totally ripped apart. There was a massive political upheaval, and it took probably 50 or 70 years before things finally turned into a kind of an obviously better scenario. Is this really the example that we should be using when talking about how the next industrial revolution is going to unfold? Now, the other reason it's a slightly strange answer is the extent to which it is the same. It is the same type of technological or mechanical revolution as the last one. And I think in many ways it's not. I think we obsess over two things at the moment with artificial intelligence, the way that I see people talking about this. And the first one is the machines are going to go sentient, and it's going to be like they're going to go Skynet. And they're going to become conscious. And we're going to have a singularity moment in 2049, like Ray Kurzweil says, and then everything's going to go wrong, and that's the end of it. And that's ridiculous. And I don't think we should pay too much attention to any of that. But the other is that all of these jobs are going to disappear. And I'm not so convinced that that's true. I think we will come up with ways of doing things. We will come up with new jobs, and there'll be wonderful new opportunities. But the question is whether, like the last industrial revolution, that will be at the cost, at significant political and social turbulence. And I think it probably will. If it is the case that a large number of certain types of jobs are no longer necessary, and I don't think we're going to be driving around in driverless cars in 5 years, but I think that the direction of travel is pretty clear, and that there will certainly be areas of work, clerical work, manufacturing work, some sort of, certainly voice recognition stuff, so a lot of jobs that people are worried about in the developing world revolving around call centers. All of those things might be unnecessary in 5 to 10 years' time. Yes, there will be some wonderful jobs to replace them, but the structure of the economy could change quite dramatically as a result, especially if they're middle-class jobs that are moving. And if we have a small number of wonderfully, fantastically paid, creative jobs that can't be automated away at the top of the economy, done by people like you in this room, and then more and more service-level jobs done at the bottom end of the economy that can't be automated away either, but that are low-paid, with very, very little job security, and that are based on platform economy models like Uber or Airbnb, then we actually have a massive problem. The same number of jobs might exist, but the structure of the economy will be very different indeed. And I heard again in Silicon Valley the same sort of thing. Well, in 10 years, we might not need anywhere near as many truck drivers. We won't automate it all away because so much of trucking is actually too difficult. It's beyond machine learning at the moment. But the big, long highway bits where you travel for 700 or 800 miles, we could probably get rid of that. Maybe we'll get rid of, a third of the people that drive trucks at the moment. Well, what are they going to do? And I heard this so many times. Well, they could retrain as web developers or app designers. What planet are you living on? That is not how things work. What man in his 50s is going to retrain as an app developer if all he's done his whole life is driven trucks? It's ridiculous. And the other thing is that truck driving in the US is one of the few well-paid jobs for people that leave school without qualifications. The salary's pretty good, $60,000 typically, and that's a very good salary if you've left school at 16 or 18 without much else. It's a very, very important part. And there's all these other jobs, of course, that are associated with that. Similarly with taxi driving. Yes, maybe we could automate it away. Maybe there'll be some other jobs to do. But taxi driving in many developed economies is the first rung on the ladder for newly arrived migrants. It's a crucial way that people come into the economy and then try and work their way up. So in every time we think about the fact that, oh yeah, blasé, we can create new jobs, are they going to be the same sorts of jobs? Are they going to be the same people that can do those sorts of jobs? Are they going to be in the same places as where the jobs are going to be lost? Because otherwise we'll create more and more sort of industrial wastelands, as we already have. And this is not good. And this is where politics kicks back in again, because suddenly there are a load of social problems. And it's not to say that we have people on the streets with pitchforks, but that it creates all sorts of secondary mental health problems, unemployment problems, welfare problems that we might not yet be ready for. And I wonder whether you would consider this as well. Whether machine learning and artificial intelligence tends towards monopolies or monopolistic practices. And I think that it probably does, in a way that maybe other industries don't. Now, every industry, in a sense, does have a tendency towards monopoly, which is why we have antitrust laws. And if you look in the US, I mean, there's a small number of aircraft carriers, there's a small number of meat producers, there's a small number of pharmaceutical companies and so on. But I wonder whether machine learning technologies have an even greater tendency towards monopoly. And I think they probably do. And the reason is that, as I see it, if you're very, very good at machine learning in one area of work, you can become very, very good in a lot of other areas of work too. If you're Google and you're fantastic at search engines, which is obviously where it started, you then have all the technical know-how and the servers and the techies that are working there and the machine learning technologies to suddenly become absolutely amazing at medical research and driverless vehicles and all sorts of other technologies besides, because some of the techniques involved are relatively similar. And so there is a danger that our economies, in addition to kind of becoming slightly more barbell-shaped, also tend towards greater monopolistic practices. And this, again, is where politics will kick in, because politicians won't like this. Monopolies and democracies cannot work together. Judge Brandeis said you can have great levels of inequality in society and monopolies, or you can have democracy, but you can't have both of those things. They don't work. And so the danger is not that or the danger maybe is that we obsess over purely the numbers of jobs created, or purely the sort of possibility of this amazing artificial intelligence, generalized artificial intelligence, and forget about the far more likely results of all of this, which is tension and turbulence in our social and political systems. And that is where I think this could be heading. And that is a problem for all of you. Because if the spoils of all of this are not spread evenly, if they're not shared out fairly, and if people don't feel like they are benefiting from this environment, from this exciting fourth industrial revolution, then there'll be huge problems. And there'll be huge backlash, which is what we are already seeing now. The answer, of course, I think, will come to politicians. What are the politicians going to do about it? Well, I don't know if any of you have read any of the manifestos here in the UK at the last election of our political parties. None of them talk about any of this stuff. None of them mention any of this. They don't talk about artificial intelligence, they don't talk about machine learning. The Conservative Party has some kind of vague idea about a digital charter that's really, really unclear what that actually is. But it's not in there. It's still not really on people's political radars yet. But here's what I think is going to happen. I genuinely believe in the next decade or so, and it could even be sooner, questions related to machine learning and artificial intelligence will become politically as important as the health service or immigration is today. And that's especially true if we see disruption in the economy. And when that happens, suddenly this is no longer a technological or a mathematical and academic discipline. This becomes a hugely political one, and suddenly that really changes how this is going to work. And I hope you're all ready for that. And I think with that, I don't know exactly how long that was, but I think with that I'll stop. Thank you very much for listening.